Welcome to The Kitchen Table, a conversation about faith, music, and culture. Join Shine.fm's ministry director Brian McIntyre Utter and his son Jake around the table for this week's chat.
Welcome to The Kitchen Table. My name is Jake.
I'm Brian.
And we are glad to have you here this week. The way this show runs down, we have a faith discussion every week, and we kind of talk about just things that are happening in our lives and things that we want to bring to light in discussion between parents and children. And then we move into Music Matters, which is a segment where Dad and I both talk about the music that's impacting our lives. So Dad brings a new song of the week, and then I bring a song that's really impacting me this week. And then Dad, like he's always done, has just brought an old song that has impacted my love for music, and so he brings an oldie but goldie from his days.
From my jukebox.
From your jukebox. Okay, whatever. And then we move into Culture Shock.
And Culture Shock basically is something that's happening in our society. Could be someone that's making a difference. It could be a celebrity, a sports figure, just your average person.
Your average Joe
Schmo, as we like to say. Yeah. This week we got an interesting celebrity in Culture Shock. We'll get to that.
Okay.
But first, our faith discussion, and we do have a guest. We're going to
we do.
Introducing our guest here shortly, very special guest. I picked a topic that is definitely being talked about a lot, that is definitely in the news a lot, and it's a topic that honestly has divided the evangelical church right down the middle as to how they view this, where they stand, what the solution is, those kinds of things. It's a topic that has been politicized, and we don't want to, we hate doing political discussions on this program. We don't do that. But we want to talk about this from the Christian perspective, from the evangelical perspective, and just try to get clarity on it, I think, more than anything. And I think that's a big part of the issue is we're not educated enough on this. And as parents, and again, we do this program because it's conversations between children and their parents. It's important to have these kinds of conversations because, again, it's in the news. It's being discussed, just in conversation and probably in the schools as well. People are living it in the schools. And so the issue is, and I'll just set this up ahead of time, we're not experts. And we might offend people.
Amen.
And we're not going to take a specific stance one way or the other than saying we're followers of Christ and this is what Jesus would do. All right. The issue is immigration. We've got the border crisis, as they label it in the news, the sensational headlines that they do, that's happening on the border in Mexico. And so we have brought our dear friend, and to the Shine.fm audience, very familiar voice to you, Danelli Rabanales Hernandez is with us. Welcome back to the studio.
Thank you.
It's good to have you back.
It's good to be back.
¿Cómo estás?
And hola, I knew you were going to say that.
Yes,
I was just waiting for it. Hola, hola.
And the
We
reason
could just do the show in Spanish.
That'd be fun.
Then we'd only get a portion of the audience and wouldn't really work that way. So we'll keep it in English. Maybe throw in some Spanish here and there. A little bit of seasoning. I want to start off with Danelli sharing your story because many people that listen might not know your story. Of course, you were born in Mexico and you came to the United States when you were how old?
5.
5 years
I was
old.
a wee little Danelli.
Okay. So tell us the story.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because as you mentioned, a lot of people don't even know I'm an immigrant. If you're just listening to, Shine.fm or you listen to Don and Danelli, I do sound very American. I am very American because I was raised here. But I am also very Mexican, for sure, very Hispanic. Spanish is my first language. That is where I was raised for the first 5 years of my life and definitely still part of my culture today. Spanish is the primary language in my home. And even with my brother, even though my brother and I are very American Mexicans, we do speak a lot of Spanish too. We get to enjoy all the Spanish memes too, which is fun. But yeah, I came here at the age of 5. My family, my parents, my brother was a baby, and myself, none of us spoke a word of English. Well, I take that back. I think I knew something like spaghetti, but I probably pronounced it like espagueti or something. I think I knew like weird words like plate and spoon, just random words that I had looked at in a book, and I have no idea how my pronunciation was. But I came right into kindergarten with, like I mentioned, no English at all, but praise the Lord, my kindergarten teacher was bilingual. Is bilingual. She's still in that school, and she helped me so much. My classmates, I always say that kindergartners taught me English, and I was little, so you pick it up so quickly.
Sure.
And by the time I was in first grade, I was just speaking and reading at everybody else's level, which was fantastic because then that meant that language barrier didn't really exist for me, and then I could help my parents too if we went to the doctors or we went anywhere, I could help them translate, which, is tough, I think, as a parent to put your children in that position. And certainly as a young kid to be translating things that you have no idea. I have no idea about taxes at that age, right? But I was doing my best to translate documents. But looking back on it, I'm glad I got to do that. I'm glad I got to help my family. And I think my immigrant experience has forced me to be a more open-minded and compassionate person, because I know what it's like to have assumptions made about myself or my family based on our immigrant status and, not being from this country or looking a certain way. Granted, I do have the benefit, because colorism exists everywhere, and I do have the benefit of being a very light-skinned Mexican, and that gives me a lot of privilege. And it's unfortunate that it's that way, but that is the reality of it. So I haven't experienced, I think, the level of discrimination that my parents have, because my parents do look like the stereotypical, I think, mental picture that people have of what a Mexican looks like. But I know what it's like to be in that position, right? And to have my parents experience hardship and to look at their incredible degree of courage and sacrifice and this just like awe-inspiring faith in who God is, and to have that kind of looked over due to their situation as immigrants in this country. So like I mentioned, the benefit of that, and it's always been kind of, hard. There are days when you ask, God, why did you bring me here? Why did you bring me to America if I wasn't going to be welcomed, or if people are going to look at me differently, or if people, as soon as they hear that I am from Mexico, just kind of shut off and won't go further. That obviously hurts, and that's painful. And I'd like to say that it's never happened in my life, but it has. And it is hurtful. And especially for me, because I'm a super sensitive person, when that happens, it's just this incredible shock. And I think, no, but don't put that wall up. Just let me connect with you. But sometimes, like I mentioned, that disconnect immediately happens when I bring up that I am from Mexico, or that I do speak Spanish, or that I love being an immigrant, because I'm grateful for how it has forced me to be more compassionate and understanding of other people. Because where I would make assumptions, I am reminded of the many times that assumptions have been made about me or my brother or my parents or people like us. And I remember what it's like to have people lend an ear and to listen to your story and to just let you in and see you as human before they see other factors. And I want to be like those people have been in my life in the ways that they have shown me Jesus. And I want to be that for others too. And I don't know what kind of person I would be if I hadn't had this immigrant experience. If I wasn't living this now, like what kind of person would I be if I had stayed in Mexico? And I will never know, but I like to think that the Lord brought my family and myself here for a reason, and that He has demonstrated to us in a special way the God that He is. Because when I hear immigrant stories in the Bible and I read about Jesus and his parents going to Egypt, or I read about Hagar, or I read about Abraham leaving everything that he knew, I can relate to that. And to me, that's amazing to be able to relate so closely to our Lord and Savior, and to relate so closely to instrumental people in Scripture. I think that's so humbling to be able to connect in a very special way. Not everybody gets that gift. So when I can make that connection for myself, and when I can point that out for others too, I just see kind of like a click there, right? That immigration is definitely not a new phenomenon. It's not something new that's just happening, this century. It's always existed, and to know that God is a God of immigrants too has always just been humbling. I mean, the minute that I figured that out, and I can't tell you exactly when that was, because it's always kind of been, I've never been ashamed of my roots, but it was kind of hard to reconcile, does God love me too? I think for a while there, especially as a teenager, I was like, does God love me? Are these misconceptions that I hear, are those true? Am I missing something? Is God maybe not for me because I'm not from here? And then I realized, it sounds cheesy, I think, when we hear that God's love has no borders, but that has become one of the most strengthening truths of my life, is to know that where we place limits on God's love, there are none for Him. And I think that's incredible to know that our God is so much more loving and bigger and just incredible than we sometimes give him credit for, and that he calls us to that same kind of love. So I'm still learning so much throughout this immigrant experience about who my God is, but the more I learn about him and the closer I get to grow to him with, my family and other people in my church who are very much so in similar situations, it's just amazing to know that our God is a God of this world. This is his world, and this is his universe, and he is the creator. And to know that, our church is a global church, that our family isn't just limited to any one nation. It's everyone coming together, no matter what nation we're from or what our ethnicity or our original language is, that we come together as a family in him. And I think that is something I'm always going to be grateful for, is that God has given me this experience with all its hardships and all its trials. And I won't lie, it's still difficult today, and it probably will be forever. But to know that I'm just getting to learn so much from him because of where I've ended up in my experience as an immigrant is just something I'll always be grateful for.
Like I mentioned earlier, half of the evangelical church have different viewpoints on it than the other half.
Right.
And it's very divisive, and trying to understand why. Okay. I personally have struggled myself through this.
Yeah.
Trying to find out, where do you stand on the issue? Where are you truly, you're a follower of Christ, and Christ is all about love and compassion and accepting the stranger. We were missionaries in Latin America, so we have a heart for Latin America as well. So I'm trying to understand the other side as well. Why do you have issues with this? I immigrated to another country when I became a missionary.
Right.
And I went through the process, and trust me, it was a multi-year process, and many times going to the immigration office and having to give blood and fingerprints and chest x-ray and all these different things.
It was a day-long thing.
Yeah, and we would have to go there and drag Jake along when he was just a kid to the immigration office.
Well, I remember that a bunch of us as missionaries, we just brought all the kids and brought a bunch of games and
just to keep them entertained.
Just a day-long thing.
And so I've immigrated to another country and had residency in that country and did the process. When I was in graduate school, I was a volunteer at a refugee processing center in Kansas City, and I was a mentor to a family from Iraq. This is a family that when the first Gulf War broke out, they had 5 sons, and 4 of those 5 sons were in their 20s, and they did not want their sons working or being in the military, and they didn't believe in what Saddam Hussein was doing. And so they gathered up their belongings, and they fled in the night, crossing the border into Turkey. And they were in a refugee camp in Turkey with the possessions they could carry, the elderly parents and their 5 adult sons. Their youngest was 17 at the time. And they lived in that tent for 2 years doing all the paperwork so they could immigrate to the United States. And I don't understand the whole process of it, but basically our government says, well, you're going to go to Kansas City or you're going to go to Minneapolis. They kind of send you to a city.
Right.
Fortunately, there's a refugee center there that helps them learn English and get jobs. And so as a mentor, I'm teaching them how to manage a checkbook, and I'm getting them out of this horrible slumlord apartment that they had rented near this center to get into better living accommodations. Once the kids got, I say kids, they're adults, but they got jobs. The parents were elderly and really couldn't work, but I could have 4 adult sons that could work. And the 17-year-old, I got into high school, just doing everything I could to help them transition properly. They suffered that time in that desert in Turkey doing the paperwork. And I think many people have issues with immigrants who are coming into this country not documented.
Right.
Not doing the paperwork. And they struggle with that because they say, well, you broke the law. You didn't come in according to what the law said. And then at the same time, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, what would ever happen if our system here in the United States, if our government collapsed, or if persecution against Christians just was overwhelmingly bad, and I couldn't make a living for my family, and I felt my family was in danger? Would I be desperate enough to break the law and leave the United States and go to another country illegally, not doing the paperwork, because I wanted to protect my family? I wanted to feed my family.
Right.
And so that's that struggle that I think many evangelicals that are trying to figure this whole thing out.
Yeah.
What do you say to that? I'd love to get your thoughts.
Yeah.
growing up, especially with all of this border, basically, I don't remember a time where there was no border problems, which I know.
Right,
that it's been
your generation doesn't.
I'm just saying, like, I've never experienced what it's like to have peaceful borders. I've just always lived with that. And I mean, yes, when I was in Argentina, I didn't really know it because there was no United States news, or I didn't pay attention.
But this happens in every country as well.
Yeah.
Just to interject here, when we lived in Argentina, there were a lot of illegal immigrants from Bolivia.
Yeah.
Who fled Bolivia because their government was in turmoil. They elected a guy who was the president of the cocaine cartel.
Yeah.
Yikes.
And the vice president was an ex-con, and so they fled Bolivia and came into Argentina illegally, and they're working minimal jobs, just scraping by, because we would go into their community and minister. And it's happening right now. I was in Ecuador this summer and having a conversation with someone who was complaining about the Venezuelans in Ecuador and how the crime has gone up and how, and I'm thinking, wow, this is weird because this is the same kind of argument we are having in the United States.
Exactly.
So it's happening everywhere.
Yeah.
And so, like, just for me, it feels like, oh, it's always going to be there, like, why even try? Which sounds really bad. I'm not used to peaceful borders. And so I feel like I'm not speaking for everyone in my generation, but I don't know I just don't know what even a possibility could be for peaceful right there.
That's a good point, I think, because I never really thought about that because I'm older than you, right? But yeah, your generation has always grown up with immigration in the news. And that's another good point, is that immigration is a global phenomenon. I think that's something that we in the United States have to realize too, that this is not an isolated incident. Like, this is all over the world. And even in Mexico now, seeing Central American immigrants come through on their way to the United States, I think it's important to pay attention to that too, because I mean, it fills me with shame to see my native country sometimes treat Central American immigrants so poorly. Not even, we talk about laws, right? And it is important to talk about that. And I think those are completely valid concerns and arguments. But I think there also has to be a level of human dignity. So I'm going to insert that there for my own home country there.
Absolutely.
The term peaceful borders, I think I kind of have an issue with, because a lot of times when we watch the news, we think that all these immigrants are just like racing toward the border. And when you turn on the news, you'll probably find snippets of videos where like immigrants are racing towards the border. But I think, one, those videos are probably coming from several groups that are like desperately trying to cross the border at that time. But it's not like that is happening every single day and has been the case for, years and years. In fact, border crossings have actually gone down from what they used to be because the border, there's more border patrol. And so it's not as safe, I guess, to cross if you're trying not to get caught by border patrol, right? Not only that, but I think better information has gone out to immigrants who are either on their way from other countries in Latin America and in Mexico themselves, that it's a dangerous journey. Yeah. And so many people die in the desert. And it breaks my heart because, they're trying to race towards what they have in their heads as this like promised land, right? Where they can have better jobs and send money home so that their kids will have something to eat every single day, 3 times a day. And now, though, that we're educating people more on the dangers and the very harsh realities of that, people are thinking twice about, okay, I can't help my family if I die on my way to America, right? So I think that's one of the ways that has gone down. And then, of course, like I mentioned, increased border patrol. So I do want to, I guess, clarify and emphasize that we should always be looking, I think, at different sources when we watch the news so that we're not always thinking like, oh, there is an invasion at the border and we're under attack, because I think that is very sensationalized at this point. Is immigration still happening? Yes. Are asylees and refugees desperately coming to our borders and trying to get in? Yes. But then we also have to realize that there is a difference between like a refugee and an asylee and an undocumented immigrant. And I think sometimes those crisscross. So asylees and refugees, right, they are trying to take the legal route, if you will, to get to America. And their circumstances are a little bit different too. Ideally, if a person claims asylum and they receive that status, it's because they are in such desperate need and they truly need something. Unfortunately, a lot of our asylees at the border are actually, in their wait, they have to go into I guess basically a camp, which isn't ideally how that should work. They're not supposed to be detained, but there's just no other way to put them, like no other place for them to stay in the meantime. So I think a lot of our asylees are unfortunately being detained there. But there needs to be a distinction between asylees and refugees and undocumented immigrants. Now, on the undocumented immigrant side, I think some undocumented immigrants could be asylees because it is very possible that they are fleeing some sort of persecution. Unfortunately, the asylee requirements are very rigid. So if an undocumented immigrant has no other choice, if you will, but they're running from an abusive home life, you see a lot of single moms with kids crossing illegally. Well, that's because they're desperate. And I heard this quote once, and I can't remember who said it or wrote it, but no one puts their kids in a boat unless the water is safer than the land back home. And that stuck out to me because, okay, what kind of desperation is driving people to leave everything they know? And I guess the citizenship and the benefits that come with it in whatever country you're originally from, right? To go into a land where you don't know the culture, you don't know the language, and you won't have legal status and the benefits of legal status just for a chance at a better life. So on the humanitarian side, there's that I always want to take into account. On the legal side, we also have to be very realistic about our requirements for people to come legally to the United States. Because the reality is, I hear a lot of, okay, why aren't the 11 million undocumented immigrants that are here, why don't they just get legal? Why don't they get citizenship? Why don't they do it the right way when they come in? And those are all valid questions. I'm definitely not putting down anybody who has those questions because unfortunately, we just don't know, right? A lot of times we just don't know the answers to that. But what I can tell you is that there is no line for a lot of people because unless you have a family member in the United States who is a legal U.S. citizen, or you don't have a company that will sponsor you, you basically can't get in legally unless you're an asylee. But let's say you have very poor economic conditions in your home country. That's not exactly a case for you to be an asylee or a refugee. So unfortunately, our immigration laws, I would say, are very harsh right now. They don't make room for a whole lot of people who are just trying to survive and who they may not be running from, desperate conditions. Unfortunately, there are a lot who just don't have the time to apply for asylee or refugee status before they will potentially lose their lives. Central America right now and some parts of South America, I can't blame them for running.
The country of El Salvador is really controlled by gangs.
Yeah.
It's not the police, it's not the military.
And I feel like sometimes we turn on the news or we hear from people from those countries and it's only getting worse. We pray every single Sunday at my church. We pray for a miracle for so many of our Latin American countries because, Mexico is rough and in some areas it's scary. But when I look at Central America and South America, my heart breaks for our brothers and sisters there because I think a lot of times it is so easy to turn a blind eye. And especially for me, I just feel like it's so hard to keep caring, right?
Yeah.
It is so important for us as Christians to not be indifferent to suffering. So when I look at the state of Venezuela, I can't blame them for fleeing into Colombia. And if I was in Colombia, I'm sure a lot of our brothers and sisters in Colombia have a lot of the same concerns that we have here in the U.S. Oh, are they bringing crime? Oh, we don't know these people. Oh, they didn't take the legal route. But these are desperate people. And like I said, I can't blame them, right? And of course, there are still those questions of the legality of undocumented immigrants. But a lot of times we have to realize that the reality is that our laws are harsh and unjust. And that's a hard truth to learn and to accept. That is our reality, and we can't ignore it.
Yeah. They have tried, and plans have been thrown back and forth, depending on your political party, of immigration reform.
Right.
Usually, whoever presents the plan, the other side
rejects
votes it down.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking.
Do you feel like the Latin culture immigrants they're really like political pawns being tossed back and forth at times?
For sure. It's not even like sometimes people feel like, oh, it's a Democratic and Republican issue. We've had both administrations and nothing has happened. Fortunately, DACA helped a lot of young people, but I know a lot of DACA recipients are frustrated because their parents didn't get anything.
Yeah.
And their parents, that generation, like my parents' generation, right? For those who are undocumented immigrants, in that parent generation, they're considered the original dreamers because they were the ones that had that dream and they took that step and they brought their kids, and you had, single moms strapping on their children to their backs because they were certain that this could provide a better opportunity for the kids strapped onto their back. Yeah. And so they are the original dreamers and they haven't gotten anything. And a lot of times I feel like when I talk to undocumented immigrants, and especially of that parent generation, I feel like they don't even demand citizenship. Most of the time when I talk to people of that generation and their children who may be undocumented, they say, all we want is a chance to work or go to school and get a driver's license and maybe have the opportunity to visit our family in our original countries every once in a while. And they're just happy with a work permit. So it's not like you've got, 11 million undocumented immigrants demanding to be citizens of the U.S. Would that be nice for them? Yes. Would I love to see that happen? Yes, because I've met so many families that deserve it, right? It's not just one family doing good deeds and like one family putting out great students into our education system. No, it's a lot of families, and the majority of them just reaching and hoping for that better life. But immigration reform could look a lot of different ways, and unfortunately, it hasn't happened. And I know we've got smart people in Congress, in Washington, D.C., and it really has become an issue of, if the other party tosses it out, I guess we're just going to reject it. And it's going to take bipartisanship to make that happen. And 11 million people depend on that happening. So it really is a need. And it really is something that can look a little bit different. I don't think... Would I love for amnesty to happen? Yeah. Is it realistically going to happen? Unfortunately, probably not, though God is a miraculous God, and I never want to put him in a box because who knows how God will surprise us. But, I mean, if we as humans, in all our flaws and in all our fears and in all our misconceptions, right, if we can do something good, I think that an immigration reform that would just allow parents to work without fear of getting deported, to allow students to go to school without feeling like they're outcasts or that they can't, apply for scholarships or that they're going to get deported in the midst of them trying to study for finals. Or if we can allow these families to at least travel home once every couple of years if they can, scrape up the money, I think that would be something that we as Americans can be proud of and something that we as Christians should be fighting for and should be really thinking about, because if this conversation is making us as Christians uncomfortable, then I think it's because we really need to expand our love and our conception of who is deserving, I guess, of our time and our effort and our love. I think we limit ourselves too much. And my prayer for myself included is that God will expand my capacity to see his image in every person, even those who I can have uncomfortable conversations with, right? Whoever they may be and whatever they may look like, that God will just allow me to realize that I may have established borders in my life and that my country, Mexico and the United States, has established borders. And that's a reality. But at the same time, my calling to be a Christian comes before my nationality as a Mexican or an American. And I think that influences everything as a church. But of course, we can never ignore the reality of the world that we live in and the countries that we live in. But I think that we as Christians can be at the forefront of positive change happening, both in ourselves and in our churches and in our countries, wherever we may be.
I want to conclude the faith discussion with this. God demands dignity of every human being. Mm-hmm. Every life is sacred. A pastor by the name of Daniel Darling wrote, "Human dignity is not just a political buzzword or a theological concept. It is, or should be, at the heart of what we think and how we act as people of God." So since every life is sacred, and we believe that as followers of Christ, then every life deserves protection. That's the main reason why we have immigration, is security. They do not feel that they can protect their family. How we speak about immigration as followers of Christ, we have to remember we're made in God's image. And that should inform how we speak about others, no matter who they are. It's healthy when Christians graciously and respectively disagree about various things, details of immigration policy, but it's also vital that the language we use to describe immigrants themselves always reflect the unique dignity that God has placed in each person. So we have to avoid using dehumanizing language. We have to realize that everyone has the potential to create and contribute in our world. Now, 20% of Fortune 500 companies in the United States were founded by immigrants. Many Fortune 500 companies today have tens of thousands of American immigrants working for them. Amazon, Apple, AT&T, Disney, General Electric, Google. Our call as followers of Christ is to treat everyone with respect. Fundamentally, we should value immigrants because they are human persons, not because of what they bring to the country in terms of economic contributions. But the reality is this: precisely because they can work and create as those created in the image of our Creator God, they are contributing in many ways. It's not only immigrants who are made in God's image, so are those whose views on immigration issues we may disagree with or find objectable. So Christians must always engage charitably with others because they too are made in God's image and are worthy of respect.
I think that deserves some snaps.
Snaps.
I like that. And if I may, there are a couple of books that I have read on.
I was just about to ask you.
Were you really?
I'm sitting back here listening. As you can tell, I didn't really talk that much just because I don't know. So I was about to ask you, are there some resources /books / like websites, articles that young people can really get to know the full effect? Because I think, especially with my generation, I think we kind of avoid it because we get the side of the news, but we don't get every side.
Right.
So I was just about to ask you that. That's funny.
And I know when I was younger, I hated talking about politics. And one day it finally clicked for me, I think in a class with Dr. David Claiborne on the campus of Olivet. It clicked for me that this wasn't about politics. This is a human issue. And it's a reality that, as I mentioned, we can't ignore. And God does not call us to be indifferent. He calls us to be loving and compassionate about so many different issues, immigration included. But a couple of, I guess, recommendations. One is to always research, because there are a lot of myths floating around. You'd be amazed how complex the immigration issue actually is. Everything from myths about immigrants, undocumented immigrants not paying taxes, to immigrants bringing crime. There's a lot of misconceptions out there, and some good research at good, reliable sources like, I don't know, even the IRS government website will clear up a lot of misconceptions. But on specifically the Christian end, there are a couple of books that I have just felt like they changed my life. And a lot of the misconceptions that even I had, and I'm an immigrant, but a lot of the misconceptions and just things I didn't realize, didn't know. M.D. Carroll wrote Christians at the Border: Immigration, the Church, and the Bible. So that would be number one for me. And then I'm in the midst of reading a book by Karen Gonzalez. I believe it's called The God Who Sees, which is kind of, inspired by Hagar's story.
Free plug, Belle.
Yeah. So definitely those two books I would definitely encourage, and shout out to those authors for letting God speak through them to many others and to myself.
Awesome.
That's our faith discussion.
Woo!
Now moving into Music Matters.
Okay, Music Matters. Thank you so much for staying with us. This is probably going to be a longer episode, and that's cool.
Danelli's dropping truth over here.
Thanks.
So we're in segment 2 here, Music Matters. In Music Matters, we bring music. We celebrate the different generational differences that we have in music. And I bring a new song. You bring a song. And speaking of you, your song was actually recommended to you this week.
Yes, my song was a recommendation.
And then we're asking Danelli to bring us songs too, as well this week. I'll start. I got a brand new song, Toby Mac.
Okay.
And it's actually featuring Cochran and Company.
Ooh.
Which I'm not sure why it's Cochran and Company, because it's just one guy.
guy.
There's really no company, but that's the name.
It's the company of the Lord Jesus with him always.
The website domain, the website domain name was available. That's why. They got a new song. It's actually Toby's song, and it's called "Edge of My Seat," which you can imagine, Toby's song with that title. It's going to be kind of. But here's Toby to talk about "Edge of My Seat," and then you hear a little snippet of it.
Edge of My Seat, man. It's a song I've been wanting to write for a while. To me, there's two postures. You can either sit back, arms crossed, eyes rolled, wondering what this day is going to hold, but you're sort of jaded toward it. maybe not actively jaded, but passively jaded about what's going to happen. Okay, this is going to happen and that's going to happen. Or there's the other posture, which is out on the edge of your seat, where you're sort of wide-eyed with wonder of what God's going to do with that day. You're hoping. There's anticipation. You're out on the edge of your seat, and your posture is different, and you're like a child. What you gonna do with this day, Daddy? Let's go.
You got me on the edge. I am on the edge of my seat. You got me on the edge. You got me on the edge. You got me on the edge.
I like it. I can dig it. Toby's getting good. I mean, he was good.
Getting
but
good.
He's
Sorry,
he's
Toby.
He's
Wow.
getting better.
He didn't mean it that way.
Sorry, I meant like
He only gets better with age.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's like a nice fine cheese.
Okay.
Better with age.
Let's move on to your song.
Perfect.
My song of the week, as I said, it was a recommendation. So earlier this week, my uncle Kevin had texted me and was talking about how he had been listening to our podcast, and
He's binged it.
he's binged all 55 episodes.
55
love.
episodes, yeah.
And
love.
so he texted me this morning at like 8 o'clock, which I was super thankful for because it kind of woke me up for my class.
You had an 8 o'clock class. Were you
Thanks,
late?
Uncle
No, I
Kevin.
wasn't. That was my speech, but today.
Okay. Yeah, I know.
But
Thanks, Uncle Kevin.
I woke
Twice.
up to it. But he recommended this song. He knows that I'm a drummer. And so he was like, hey, I heard this song on Spotify. Very drum heavy. I think you'll like it. And so I just listened to it while I was getting ready. And it's called This Love by the Dodds, which when I read the Dodds, I was thinking Southern gospel.
Oh, yeah.
Like, oh, it's going to be.
It's the Dodds
It's
Family
the
Singers.
Dodds. Yeah. But I listened to it and it's actually, I think I texted, it's bopping. And I know that he doesn't know what that means.
No, he doesn't.
But when a person of your generation says
Yes,
it's bopping, that's
it's
a
bopping.
compliment.
The youngins will know what I'm talking about.
Okay.
But here's a snippet of This Love by the Dodds.
This love has a hold of me. For the wonder of so wild and free. This love has a hold of me.
Definitely a bopping song.
Yeah.
What a bop.
Oh, fun fact. Dad is on TikTok.
No way. Are you viral yet?
I have not created one.
Oh,
No.
well, you need
He
to.
hasn't created.
Oh,
He
okay,
just
but you're
likes them.
on TikTok.
But I
That's
got him on
important.
it.
You know, TikTok is like Vine 2.0, but
Amen,
unfortunately
amen,
not
amen.
as good as Vine. Sorry,
Okay,
Jake. You know
back-
it's true.
I love Vine. I love Vine. Okay, back to Music Matters. Denelli, what's your song for the week?
Okay, so it's no secret if you listened to the afternoon show, right, with Don and Denelli before it was Don and Megan, that I just love Pat Barrett so much, and he is my son. But also, beyond me having adopted him, I think his music is absolutely beautiful, makes me think a lot. Everything is Sacred is his song that is just rolling around in my head, has been for like months now. I have a CD on repeat in my car, it's fine. But Everything is Sacred by Pat Barrett.
Heaven is upside down. Oh, it can be here and now. Oh, see.
And kind of goes along with our theme about how every life is sacred.
Yeah.
You see how you tied that
Snap.
together?
Shout out to Jesus.
Yeah. All right, that wraps up Music Matters. Time now to move into Culture Shock. Okay, Culture Shock. We share things that are happening in our society. Maybe it's a celebrity or a sports figure who has done something, or just someone who's making a difference in the
Joe
kingdom.
Schmo.
And if you noticed this last week, Justin Bieber, singer.
I'm a believer.
Are you a believer?
I am a believer.
I ridiculed him forever when he was
Yeah,
a
you
kid. But you know,
this
Justin's now married,
Right.
He
attend
is,
church
he is.
faithfully, and is working out his faith more than anything. And he put a post out this week on social media. I wanted to read a lot of it, and his grammar's not the best, but I'll just tell you that. I love the fact that he has such a huge platform, and he is working through the issues of faith in his own life and his relationship with Jesus, and how others are seeing this, and it's going to spark questions in their minds and maybe be the catalyst that's helping them begin a faith walk and figuring out a faith journey as well. So I'll read a good chunk of this. It says, it's hard to get out of bed in the morning with the right attitude when you're overwhelmed with your life, your past, job, responsibilities, emotions, your family, finances, your relationships. When it feels like there's trouble after trouble after trouble, you start foreseeing the day through lenses of dread and anticipate another bad day. The cycle of feeling disappointment after disappointment. Sometimes it even gets to the point where you don't even want to live anymore, where you feel like it's never going to change. I can fully sympathize with you, is what he says. I could not change my mindset. I am fortunate to have people in my life that continue to encourage me to keep going. You see, I have a lot of money, clothes, cars, accolades, achievements, awards, and I was still unfulfilled. Have you noticed the statistics of child stars and the outcome of their life? There is an insane pressure and responsibility put on a child whose brain, emotions, their frontal lobe, the decision-making part of that, aren't developed yet. No rationality, defiant, rebellious, things all of us have to go through. But when you add the pressure of stardom, it does something to you that's quite unexplainable. You see, I didn't grow up in a stable home. As my talent progressed and I became ultra successful, it happened within a span of 2 years. My whole world was flipped on its head. I went from a 13-year-old boy from a small town to being praised left and right by the world, with millions saying how much they loved me and how great I was. I don't know about you, but humility comes with age. You hear these things enough as a young boy and you actually start believing it. Rationality comes with age, and so does your decision-making process. One of the reasons you can't drink until you're 21. Everyone did everything for me, so I never even learned the fundamentals of responsibility. So by this point, I was 18 with no skills in the real world, with millions of dollars and access to whatever I wanted. This was a very scary concept for anyone. By 20, I made every bad decision you could have thought of and went from one of the most loved and adored people in the world to the most ridiculed, judged, and hated person in the world. Being on stage, according to studies, is a bigger dopamine rush than almost any other activity. So these massive ups and downs on their own are very hard to manage. You notice a lot of touring bands and people end up having a phase of drug abuse and believe it's due to not being able to manage huge ups and downs that come with being an entertainer. So Justin goes on saying this: I started doing heavy drugs at 19 and abused all of my relationships. I became resentful, disrespectful to women, and angry. I became distant to everyone who loved me, and I was hiding behind a shell of a person that I had become. I felt like I could never turn around. It's taken me years to bounce back from all these terrible decisions, fix broken relationships, and change relationship habits. Luckily, God blessed me with extraordinary people who love me for me. Now I am navigating the best season of life, marriage, which is an amazing, crazy new responsibility. You learn patience, trust, commitment, kindness, and humility, and all of the things it looks like to be a good man. All this to say, even when the odds are against you, keep fighting. Jesus loves you. Be kind today. Be bold today, and love people today, not by your standards, but by God's perfect, unfailing love. That was Justin Bieber who wrote that.
Right on, Justin. Amen, brother. Preach it.
Figuring out life. And thank God that someone got to him, and he's now faithfully attending church in California with his wife and working on his faith, which is great, and influencing others, because there's still plenty of believers out there, right?
Hey, don't mess with that.
So
Right on, Justin.
we love to share stories like that in Culture Shock and things that are making a difference in our culture. So keep praying for people like Justin and other celebrities, actors, sports figures who are followers of Christ, living it out in their visible platform and saying things like that. So keep supporting them. And that is Culture Shock. And it brings a conclusion to this week's episode of The Kitchen Table.
Yeah, it does.
We want to thank our very special guest this week, Danelli.
Oh, gracias.
We appreciate so much your insight. Again, if you want to communicate to any of us, the best way of doing that, on the Shine.fm Facebook page, we have the Kitchen Table group that you can be a part of, and we continue discussions there as well. Or if you want to maybe suggest a topic to us that you'd love for us to tackle, or some music, or even a Culture Shock thing you might have found, you can communicate to us that way. So thank you so much for hanging out with us.
Stay salty.
Thanks for listening to The Kitchen Table on the Shine.fm podcast network from Olivet Nazarene University. Be sure to subscribe for more content delivered each week on faith, music, and culture.